Hello, everyone. Welcome. I'm Ed Knight. I'm the Executive Vice Chairman of Nasdaq and proud to be the Chairman of the TechNet Executive Council. And we're going to have some good news for you today. Don't you want some good news? I think we all could use some good news. We're going to be talking about artificial intelligence and the role TechNet and its companies are playing in developing what we think is a critical technology for the world and to make the world a better place. As you know, TechNet was founded in Silicon Valley in 1997. We like to call ourselves the voice of innovation. We foster a climate of innovation and competition throughout the economy and in the tech industry. We support not just big tech, but small tech and small business in the United States. We frankly believe artificial intelligence is critical to the continued growth and competitiveness of the U.S. economy at all levels. And you're going to hear more about that today. We want safe and responsible development and deployment of artificial intelligence. And with those guardrails in place, we feel AI, as I said, can help businesses of all sizes succeed across our economy, empowering workers, democratizing and expanding access to essential services, and improving product innovation and security. It is now being used today to predict severe weather more accurately, to protect critical infrastructure. At Nasdaq ourselves, our market is protected by AI from attacks and to make it resilient, to defend against cyber attacks and accelerate the development of new medical treatments across the board. One of the most promising and exciting areas of AI is in the medical treatments, and you'll be hearing about that, and developing life-saving vaccines. Today, you will hear from 4 leaders from TechNet, member companies, people who are focused on the development of AI and focused on developing guardrails and protections for all Americans to make sure it's used safely and that the promise of AI, which is so great, is realized for all of us and for the whole world.
Thank you, Ed. I'm Sarah Cott, Senior Vice President of Programming at The Hill. Thank you all for joining us in person this morning, and thank you to everyone joining us online for our event, Advancing America's Leadership in AI. I'd like to thank our sponsors, TechNet, for their support of this discussion. AI headlines are in the news daily, but today we are here to discuss the innovative uses of artificial intelligence, the latest efforts to govern it, and AI's importance to America's global competitiveness and national security. Before we get underway, a few housekeeping notes. If you are here with us in the room, we'll remind you again to please keep your cell phones on silent. But you are welcome to join the conversation on social media. You can follow us on Facebook, X, and Instagram at The Hill Events using The Hill Tech. And with that, I am delighted to welcome Julia Manchester, The Hill's national political reporter.
Thank you so much, Sarah, and thank you so much to TechNet and the Hill Events team for really putting on this event. I am no expert in AI, so I'm very excited to chat with some experts today. And you know, it's so interesting because we've heard, especially over the last year, so much about AI, but so many mixed messaging. I mean, there's a huge fun side to it. ChatGPT, I know people can have fun with that, but there's lots of opportunity, like in the open remarks, to predict severe weather, that kind of a thing. But we do know there are questions about national security surrounding AI, privacy, our competitiveness with potential adversaries like China. So I just want to go down the line, and we'll start with you, Rahul. Just where do you think we are in terms of artificial intelligence right now in this moment?
I think a lot of people will say we're just getting started. I think we're getting started on the positive impact and the positive possibilities that AI launches. But unfortunately, we're also just getting started on the threats and the bad things that can happen with generative AI. And good examples is if you've been watching news or keeping track of all the scams that have happened over the last few months, all the way from the President Biden robocall incident that happened in New Hampshire, or what's called the granny scam, which is elderly people receiving calls from what seems like their grandchildren, but obviously are not their grandchildren, or whether that is scams that are even happening in companies where employees are getting calls or are participating sometimes on video conferences with who they think are their employees, and they end up being scammed and are forced to, or end up doing wire transfers and losing money. So I think we are just getting started. The good news is I think there'll be a lot of productivity gains for the economy, and good things will happen for all of us and the society in general. But we've got to figure out a way to keep track and contain some of the bad things that can possibly happen with AI as well.
Absolutely. And Kent, want to get your perspective. I know that Google's been doing lots of experimentation with this.
Sure. And first off, let me thank everyone for coming today. It's great to get the tech community, the policy community coming together on these important issues. Rose's done a nice job of alluding to some of the challenges as we work through the AI issues. Let me touch base on some of the opportunities as well, because it's very true that we're in a race right now, and it's not a space race, it's an innovation race. And one thing I can tell you about innovation races is they often are won not by the first to invent, but by the best to deploy. So it's critical for American leadership in AI that we actually get this right as we roll it out. Now, you've all been using AI for a dozen years, if you've used online search or translate or email or mapping tools. And we've recently had a focus on the chatbot side of AI. But that's only a small fraction of the ultimate potential of these tools. We are seeing dramatic advances from the everyday to the extraordinary in the way science is now being done at digital speed. Those are advances in healthcare, moving a generation ahead with regard to being able to understand how proteins are folded, with regard to energy, being able to capture nuclear fusion reactions and with magnetic fields. AI can help anticipate and predict how to hold those fusion reactions in place for a longer period of time. You heard about the examples in cybersecurity and disaster preparedness. We're also seeing dramatic improvements across the board with regard to material science. Hundreds of thousands of new materials being created. Again, generational progress in the course of weeks and months. So the promise is huge. And that's not just at the scientific edge. We are seeing dramatic improvements in productivity that will make American workers more productive. In a sense, it's the reverse of globalization. We are going to make American workers more valuable and have them be able to create more over time by skilling up, by being able to use these tools in dramatic new ways. So estimates we're seeing from everyone from Goldman Sachs to McKinsey suggest that the productivity boom from AI could be something on the order of 20 trillion with a T, $20 trillion in the next few years. That's the size of the American economy as a whole. So that promise is remarkable. And that's the real reason why we need to get this right with regard to the deployment and the appropriate policy safeguards.
Kerry?
Sure. Well, so I'm going to go from the, thanks for having me, from the sort of very large to, I think, really about AI and what it means to the local people who are actually going to use it to democratize their access to data and insights. If you think about the potential AI has for our economy, it's huge. And it's not just our economy, big companies. It is actually small businesses who are really the local backbone of all of our economy. Their access to tools, digital tools, actually has helped provide them with more success than anything else. And access to digital tools that use AI and provide them with insights around how they can better run their businesses lead to more successful small businesses, which leads to a better economy for us overall. And so while, yes, we have to develop these things responsibly, there has to be protections and safeguards, we have to also think about the people who are going to be enabled by AI in their businesses, in their jobs. People get smarter, businesses get smarter, they're able to actually prosper because of it. We have to consider that actually in mind as we're thinking through everything that we need to do around this. Yes, it needs to be safe, it needs to be accurate, it needs to be protected of our privacy, but it also needs to help enable us. And I think that's where I think we need to have more conversation, because the democratization of the access to these tools is really what is going to enable us to be more prosperous as a community.
Right, and round us off, Michael.
Yeah, the only thing that I would add, I think Ken did a terrific job in sort of highlighting some of the benefits. I think the one thing we always have to keep in mind for this technology, compared to many other breakthroughs that have happened over the years, is the actual democratization of the creation of the technology itself. And what's so unique about this, if you think about kind of some of the other big booms that we've had over the last 20 years, whether it be cloud or compute, or even operating systems for mobile devices, those are all American technologies that we have generally dominated globally on. With artificial intelligence, particularly the creation of large language models, you're seeing a real democratization of that. If we were having this conversation a year ago today, the best performing open source LLM, large language model in the world, would have been created by UAE, called Falcon. Over the course of the last year, a team of 10 people, now it's a company of 40 in France, has one of the best performing open source models in the world. So the barriers to entry on some of these high-end state-of-the-art models are lower than you would think. So I think it's more imperative than ever for us as a country here in the United States to ensure that we maintain our leadership position. We were the ones who had the greatest breakthroughs that led to ChatGPT and all these other great inventions. So it's imperative to create sort of a policy structure that allows us to maintain this leadership while we see so many others around the world desperately trying to catch us.
And Michael, you worked at the other end of Pennsylvania Avenue as the chief technology officer at the White House. What should the government be doing when approaching AI going forward?
Yeah, I mean, my general sense, I think the most important thing that the U.S. should do should be put policies in place which can continue to ensure that we're driving technological innovation here, but also at the same time protecting American citizens. And I think the easiest way to sort of think through that is by focusing AI regulations on industry and sector-specific approaches to regs. So think about things like the FDA should be the ones continuing to do the regulations around AI-powered medical diagnostics, not create sort of one-size-fits-all AI regulations that some other parts of the world are potentially pursuing.
Right. And you talk about, regulation and, the citizens' role in this. Rahul, I was actually in New Hampshire earlier this year when that fake robocall went out. And there was actually another instance earlier last year. I was covering the DeSantis campaign, and they had rolled out this ad that had a number of pictures with Donald Trump and Anthony Fauci. But one of the pictures was AI. And a number of reporters, including myself, we were fooled. And it seemed trivial at the moment, at first, but it did sort of have this ominous undertone of, what could this mean going forward? Are you concerned about the state of AI, I guess, going into elections, not only in the United States, but globally this year?
So let me first start with the positive. I think technology exists for us to be able to detect, these fakes or synthetically generated content that might be going around as real content. And I think, so that's the good news, that, as you look at the arms race, if you will, between good AI and bad AI, I think, good AI is in front and can catch, most of these deepfakes. The challenge, I think, for us as a society really is how do we, and I think this goes back to one of the comments that Michael made, how do we put safeguards so that an average person can feel safe, right? That they know that they're not going to get scammed. They can trust the information they are seeing or the information that is being served to them, whether that's on a phone call they're receiving, or whether that is on a media channel, or whether that's on a social media channel, or any other platform. I think we need to get to the state where, just like today, when you go to a food store and you go to a retail grocery store and you pick up an apple and the apple is safe, I think an average citizen needs to feel the same level of safety or confidence or trust in any piece of information they're accessing. And for us to get there, I think there is a big role that policy and regulations has to play. And I think taking a look at this as a supply chain and how do you really protect the entire supply chain of information is probably one way of looking at it. The good news is we as a society know how to handle these situations. We've done it in other areas. Food safety is a very good example. So, I'm very optimistic that we will find a way around because A, the technology exists, and B, a lot of smart people are thinking about how to solve this problem.
So Kent, zooming out from a global perspective, Google is obviously a very global company. What is global AI governance efforts? What are they looking like? And really, what can the U.S. learn from those efforts in terms of approaching AI?
I would say they're going surprisingly well, actually. You've seen a great deal of alignment around some of the core principles. The G7 came together with the Hiroshima AI process and set forth 10 different principles that have been a guiding approach for a variety of different things. It's a nice coincidence we have the Prime Minister of Japan in town this week. Japan, it's an interesting model because Japan has a demographic challenge, and there are more robots per capita in Japan than there are anywhere else in the world. It's partly because they need the productivity boost that they get from robots and that they will get from AI. And I think this is a lesson for the rest of the world as we think about these challenges. So as we go through the various safety institutes that are being created, the new legislation you're seeing in Europe, the executive order here in the United States, the NIST risk management framework, I think there's a lot of positive alignment. But we have to remember, this technology won't take care of itself. We do need to make sure we have a concerted effort to move forward. If you look at China, the Premier of China just announced their AI Plus initiative to try and turbocharge Chinese investment in large language models. China has 120 large language models that are public already. So how do we in the United States have a regulatory framework that is enabling? It's not that we need a government subsidy, but we do need to have a supportive structure that strikes a balance with copyright, works out the issues that are out there with regard to privacy. And there's new legislation pending at the federal level that would create an aligned U.S. approach there. How do we avoid the fragmentation of different states regulating in different ways? In California alone, there are 53 different AI bills pending in the legislature today. So aligning there and then making sure that we're looking out for the workforce and taking advantage of the possibility of upskilling our folks through private efforts, and public-private partnerships, community colleges and more. Those are all going to be an important part of making AI a success.
Kerry, Intuit has done a lot in terms of AI to help medium-sized businesses, small businesses. Talk about how AI has affected customers and maybe made their experience better and easier.
So AI, as Ken has said, AI has been in our products for many, many years behind the scenes, helping people get more for their refund, right? Understanding what deductions are right for them. So if everyone has not yet filed their taxes, now is the time. Getting close.
I thought you were doing that for me.
Yeah, I am going to do that for you. And AI will actually at some point do that for you. It will take a lot of time and some investments in things like accuracy and all those things. But for our customers, what AI can really mean is we have small businesses that are really on the edge of viability. And for AI to be able to actually understand their data, understand what money is coming in, what money is going out, and be able to tell them, hey, next week you're going to be short. Maybe you should actually go out and chase some invoices that are overdue. Let me help you do that. Send out invoices and actually help small businesses collect on money more quickly, right? That is, do them so that they can survive another month. This is really what it means. It's very much month by month when it comes to small businesses. So things like AI that can give them insight to what's coming for their business is a fantastic opportunity for them to actually survive and grow their businesses. When it comes to growing their businesses, AI can actually help with things like marketing, right? If you think about creating marketing campaigns, if you're a small business owner, you are like the CFO, the marketing manager, the HR partner. AI can actually supplement you in all those ways to help you become the person who can do that now. Can create marketing campaigns for you that are actually successful, have been tested, uses data as information to actually create a successful marketing campaign so you can get more customers and last yet another month. This is how AI can actually help create successful, strong small businesses. And our customers are experiencing that right now. So
you mentioned timing in terms of how long it will take for us to get that point. I know you use the example of doing your taxes, but it seems like we've heard last year. We hear soon AI will be able to write, for example, news stories or copy for newsprint, that sort of thing. And we're starting to see it, but we haven't seen it yet. I mean, how much time do you think it will take for AI? And I'll pose this to all of you to really become, I guess, a dominant part of our everyday lives? I mean, I guess we're already sort of there in a way.
Yeah, I'm happy to jump in. Look, I think, again, as Kerry rightly said, AI is already all around us. It's just largely behind the curtain. And it's stepped out from behind the curtain a little bit in the last couple of years, and people are focusing on it more. But it is already being used to write some news stories. We have tools that journalists are using today to do data-driven journalism that can pull from large data sets and find insights that they might not otherwise would have taken years of combing through government records to disclose. So I think it's going to be a tool, a companion, a creative assistant for us, as well as all the scientific advances that we've talked about that will really change the world around us.
Michael, when you were at the White House, you helped architect the U.S.'s first national AI strategy, the American AI Initiative. Are we still seeing that framework within the government today?
Yes, I think, fortunately for the country, this is a very bipartisan area of policy, and I think it's served American people very well over the last few years because of it. I think generally in that initial strategy, there was a focus on R&D, on workforce, on regs, and on sort of international engagement. And those sort of like 4 lines of effort are essentially ones that have continued on through this current administration. Just break that down a little bit. I think that the key thing to think a lot about is how does the U.S. spend its federal research and development dollars. So the U.S. spends about $150 billion a year on federally funded R&D. And both the previous administration and this administration have prioritized AI as an area that the National Science Foundation, our national labs, places like NIST should continue to fund, and I find that very, very encouraging. I think what has changed dramatically since then has been sort of the mass proliferation of large language models. And AI has suddenly become something that everyday Americans are using, can touch, feel, and experience. And because of that, you've seen this really increased interest by the Hill to think about ways to kind of approach some of the harder regulatory questions.
And, I opened with, saying I think there's been a lot of mixed feelings among the American public, not in a bad way, but, AI is very new. People don't, they're sort of getting used to it. How have you, in all of your experiences, how are policymakers and lawmakers, how are they sort of digesting this? Rahul, if you, or anyone.
I think Kent alluded to this earlier, that there's a lot of good policy work that's happening. I think this is an area where, you need to, it's not about moving very fast, it's about moving thoughtfully. Because I think you can very easily over-regulate, or you might end up, stifling the innovation that is needed. So I think policy, there's a lot of discussion, there's a lot of draft bills, there's a lot of, thinking that's going on in think tanks. But, we haven't yet addressed this in a way that we can say, look, there is enough of a framework that will ensure safe use of AI. I think that is still work in progress.
Right.
2 quick thoughts just to riff off on that. 1, the public perceptions, and 2, government uses. From the public perception side, we did a survey a couple months ago with the Ipsos group globally. And we found an interesting thing, that the most optimism around the world around AI is in the Asia-Pacific region and in the broad rest of the world. Next was Europe. And last was the United States. And I'd actually never seen that before with regard to technology. Normally, people in the United States have been more optimistic about technology than people in Europe. And I do think we have a challenge to make sure we explain how AI is making everyday life better. And that's the government side of the house. If government can be a leader in the deployment of some of these tools, everything from the big social challenges we've talked about, or cybersecurity, or emergency preparedness and disaster relief, to everyday things like making the DMV work better so you don't have to stand in line so long. I think that will actually help explain to the American public what's in it for them. What are the real tangible benefits they're getting? And ultimately, that's how we live up to the motto behind us, maintaining America's leadership in AI.
Yeah, and one thing I think the government can do is encourage the use of these tools across businesses. And allow businesses to learn more about these tools through government programs, government subsidies, so that these tools can be used across the United States in small businesses who can definitely use this in order to make them succeed, but also become advocates for it, right? And be able to develop it further. This is really the use of technology across our enterprises is really what is going to actually allow us to be more financially successful. And the government needs to actually encourage that use.
Absolutely. Michael, you've said in the past that federal agencies should implement existing laws to advance responsible adoption of artificial intelligence. What does that look like?
Yeah, I mentioned a little bit at the top, but I think the core insight there is that there have been decades, if not centuries, of work done by a lot of these agencies on how to regulate particular domains. We don't ask HHS to regulate vehicles and vice versa. And I think if you think about it in the fullness of time, there have always been new technologies that have happened. The cars that were initially being developed 50 years ago are very, very different than the ones today. Yet Department of Transportation over time and NHTSA have figured out how to deal with these new technological breakthroughs and have kept, by and large, American automobiles safe. And I think the same kind of philosophy, I think, should present itself with AI. And the general sort of thesis behind all of it is that essentially, artificial intelligence is a ubiquitous technology that will appear in everything we do, from the way that banks operate and folks like the SEC and others are regulating them, to the way that medical diagnostics are created and drones fly and autonomous vehicles drive. And I think what's important is that sort of the experts in those individual domains continue to be the ones who are leading the regulatory efforts on them. That being said, and as we saw a few weeks ago, the Office of Management and Budget, the White House put out sort of generalized guidance to some of these agencies as they think through how their individual industries are impacted by this. But I think to get the most effective regulation in this domain, it has to be sector and industry specific.
Right. And I'm a complete layperson in this area, but what do we think that regulation, I know you touched on it a bit, Michael, but what does it look like going forward? Are we going to see specific companies like Google, for example? Will they be regulated? What does that look like? Will it be that specific, or will it be more broad, if that makes sense?
I think I'll just chime in one and I'll let others fill it. I think what we typically try to encourage is the regulation should be use case specific, not technology specific. Mm-hmm. So, if someone does a nefarious activity using a knife, for example, we're not regulating knives. We're regulating the activity that he did with the knife. And I think the same goes with artificial intelligence. And I think that's generally the lens that we should be thinking about. And there's going to be lots of people sort of developing AI tools, but how those tools are ultimately used, there's a huge body of law already that makes a lot of these issues already legal.
I think that makes a lot of sense. A lot of the art here is finding the gaps in existing regulation. Yeah. I think there's actually a surprising degree of consensus that things that are illegal without artificial intelligence should be illegal with artificial intelligence. And so you have already a base of knowledge in banking or pharma or retail or agriculture with hundreds of years of knowledge that's been accumulated. So we don't really need an AI agency so much as we need every agency to be an AI agency and to understand the new implications in their area and understand where existing laws or regulations may fall short, rather than starting from scratch and doing a one-size-fits-all over the top.
Right. And I want to move on to the issue of, AI and China. Kent, I think you brought this up in your opening remarks, talking about not a space race, but sort of a race with other countries. How does the U.S. compete and make sure it maintains its leadership in AI?
It's a critical area because technology leadership, economic productivity leadership is a key to global competitiveness and ultimately global influence. America, the fact that we have done as well as we have so far is a tribute to American ingenuity. We've built some of the most powerful and useful tools out there, but this is a fast-moving, fast-evolving sector. We are, broadly speaking, I think most people would say ahead, but we're not ahead by that much, and we're not necessarily ahead in all fields of AI. So this is as the technology evolves, as the computer science frontiers advance, we need to not just continue to invest, but to continue to empower and create a spirit of optimism and practical deployment. We learn an awful lot when the tools go off into the field and where they're working, where they could be working better, and we build that back into the models. The rate of change in this sector is like nothing we've ever seen before. That's an exciting moment, but we're not alone in the world. Michael mentioned, when countries like the UAE or China or many others can get into this race and basically all be at the starting line at the same time, we can't rest on our laurels. We have to continue to have a forward-looking, optimistic approach to this, an enabling approach to regulation, and a partnership approach to how do we understand what does good look like, what are the expectations of consumers, to Rahul's point, so we make sure we're living up to our contract with our users.
So Rahul, if we're in this, we're essentially competing with other countries in terms of AI, how can we compete, but at the same time make sure we're using AI responsibly and that it's being regulated responsibly?
I think this is picking up something that both Kent and Michael mentioned. Innovation over a sustained period of time, if you want to stay ahead, really comes from a couple of things. One, do you really have enough smart people? Do you have the right talent? And clearly America does. Second is, once you have the technology, can you accelerate the deployment and the use cases so that you can learn from it quickly? You can shrink the time it takes to learn so that you can do the second version, the third version, and the fourth version of the technology really, really fast. And that's what's that's what's really needed. And the United States has done this really well with previous technology breakthroughs. And, so in some ways we have the muscle memory to do it again. I think to drive deployment at a large scale across across our economy, across all industries, that's where you need to provide confidence, and you need to provide guardrails, both for businesses but also consumers.
Right. And Kerry, I know that Intuit works with, like I said before, medium and smaller size businesses, but we're seeing businesses of all sizes getting into AI. What do you think larger sized companies can learn from Intuit and how it's handling this?
So, as we've all talked about, AI has been part of our infrastructure for a very long time, and some of those things that we've implemented include governance across our company around how we implement AI, principles around how we implement AI, oversight from executives of the use cases of how we implement AI to make sure it actually is consistent with our principles and consistent with the law and is something that we can actually ensure that our customers trust in. And so, having a governance process across a company is something that I think all companies will need to implement over time as they bring AI into their processes. If they use them to help supplement workers, they'll need to have governance across that around things like privacy, security in particular. Are we controlling for things like bias? All kinds of things that a governance process can control for. I think companies are going to need to implement those kinds of processes as they both distribute AI through their customers and have their customers use it, but also just as they use AI internally to actually supplement the work in the company.
Right. And on the other end of that spectrum, in terms of companies, Kent, Google's a very large company, but I know that you all have been experimenting with using AI in search. And off to the side earlier, we were chatting about this function, and I'll oftentimes just put random questions into Google, and I've really enjoyed it. I've learned a lot. How has that been going? What's been the user response, and how do you guys plan on growing from that?
It's a fascinating challenge because we have been working on these tools for many years. A lot of the innovations actually came out of some of the papers that we were publishing, but we have been a little cautious to launch these tools into search, and we are gradually throttling that up, in part because we have a responsibility to the users that use our services. We have something like 7% of the queries coming into Google are for healthcare kinds of questions. You do not want a hallucinated answer to a question of what's the right dosage of Tylenol for a 6-month-old, or I'm having a heart attack, what should I do? So we're balancing the notion of the usefulness of the AI summarization function and the need to ground it in authoritative information and not showing it in certain high-stakes queries, but showing it more and more where it can be useful to users. And I think we're getting that balance about right, but it's something, again, that we learn by doing. As we get out there and we see, boy, this is proving really useful, users are loving this, but there's a higher error rate than we'd like over here, we throttle it down over there. We're obviously across the industry working to have reducing the problem of so-called hallucinations, where the AI models go off and create their own reality. That number is coming down constantly. And we can use our traditional expertise in search to ground across some of the most authoritative sources on the web to make the tools even more resilient and more reliable and more trustworthy for users.
Absolutely. And I want to move on to the topic of AI and the economy. I know that we've touched on this sort of throughout this discussion, but I just want to get a sense as to, how what we can expect to see in terms of, AI fueling the economy. What does that really look like? I'll pose it to all of you.
Maybe let me kick this off. I think several people have come out with this quote about it's not too far-fetched to think we'll get to $1 billion company with just one employee, right? And I think in our own, Pindrop is a relatively small company as compared to Google and Intuit. We are already seeing pretty dramatic improvements that you can get from using AI the way it exists today. Whether that is productivity of developers writing code, whether that is productivity of some of our customers or call centers, whether there's productivity of call center agents with the tools that they can get for call summaries, whether the tools they can get for fraud case analysis. So the productivity benefits are already evident, and these are pretty dramatic improvements. These are on the lower end, I would say 20-30%. On the higher end, 100-200%. So I think the promise of the technology is there. The proof points are pretty real. This is not hype. This is actually this is things that you can touch and feel.
Let me share the insights from two economists, one from the East Coast and one from the West Coast. David Otter at MIT has argued that AI may well be a boon for the middle class. And he uses the example of nurse practitioners. A generation ago, we didn't really have nurse practitioners. We had nurses and we had doctors. But we've been able to upskill nurses to actually provide the services that doctors used to provide, which is great for them and great for their patients in areas who may not have access to doctors. But now with AI, you can actually increasingly do the diagnosis, understand the potential implications, the side effects, et cetera, and empower workers in a way that you could never have before. And that's true in the United States, and that's true around the world in areas that might not have a doctor within 100 miles. So I think that's a very positive vision. The second economist is a fellow by the name of Eric Brynjolfsson, who's currently out at Stanford. He wrote an article called The Turing Trap. Now, you all may have heard of the Turing test. You'll know that AI has become really powerful when you can't tell the difference between AI and a human behind the screen. What Eric argues is that we have to be careful not to design AI to replace workers, but rather to complement workers, to be a tool that they can use to make themselves even more productive and more valuable. And that's, I think, a challenge for the industry as well as government as we think about this. The goal is to have a companion, a tool, an empowering agent, not a replacement agent.
That's a really interesting point, because I know in the media industry there has been some concern about that. What does our role look like? Will we be replaced by AI? But I mean, is the onus on companies to make that clear in a sense? I mean, I know there's some anxiety about it.
Yeah, there's no question. But I think the evolution of the American workforce is really remarkable. We have a very dynamic. Remember, we say we lose 6 million jobs a year, but we gain 6.5 million jobs a year. And so making sure we can help people with that transition as their roles are redefined. So maybe a reporter becomes an editor becomes a curator of other content. Reporters can use these new tools in interesting ways to open up new vistas. It's an important distinction. The natural tendency for businesses is to say, how do I take my existing processes and make them more efficient and have them use fewer people? But that's only the first order response. The second order response requires an active imagination. You have to think about, what things can I do now that I could never have done before? And that's the story of the progress of the American economy. And that's happened again and again and again, and we think this is a great new chapter.
Right. So essentially, it's sort of a challenge.
It is a challenge for all of us.
Yeah, Kerry,
Well, again, practically speaking, I think that what AI can actually help us with is it can actually provide services and the abilities and capabilities where people didn't have them before. Small businesses never had like a marketing director. They never had somebody who could analyze data to actually help them make better financial decisions in a faster way. AI actually will give that to them in a way that actually changes their ability to be successful. And so to me, that's how we're going to grow the economy, is through small businesses and their success. And they don't have those things now, but AI actually supplements them so that they become a marketing director. They become a financial officer. They can do that through AI. They don't need to actually, and then they can succeed where before they would not have. And so I think that is how we're going to grow. We're going to grow jobs. We're going to grow the businesses through that kind of deployment.
Michael, I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
Yeah, so from the government perspective, what opportunity, I mean, is there optimism in terms of what it can do for the economy? And, when we talk about regulation, I know, like I said, there's some worker anxiety about this. What's that perspective look like?
Yeah, I think generally most politicians who talk about this see it as sort of a two-sided coin. There's tremendous opportunity, but somehow there's obvious and noticeable downsides you have to think about and figure out how to deal with. I think to kind of build on what was discussed previously and also tie into how government use case, I think the thing to always think about is remember what the primary ingredients are to high-quality artificial intelligence. And it all comes down really to the data that you use to train these models. And we have seen over this incredible revolution over the last 18 months, all of those models are essentially been trained on publicly available information. So you can ask questions about healthcare or come up with marketing material, whatever it may be. But where the real value and where the real benefit is going to be realized in the years ahead is individual enterprises or companies or governments themselves leveraging the proprietary data that they themselves have that nobody else has access to. So that is why a particular company, let's make it up, Coca-Cola has all sorts of information around the way that they sell their product, develop their product, market it around the world that no one else has. And Gemini will never have access to that, and OpenAI will never have access to that. It is like their secret sauce. And I think what we're going to end up seeing is these companies being able to leverage their own proprietary data to build customized, fine-tuned LLMs that service their particular needs. And that's where you're going to see an unlock of a lot of value and potential. And if you translate that to the government use case, there's tons of government data around the way that we provide citizen-facing services, that we interact with businesses or citizens that can be leveraged to create their own government LLM. So I think that's kind of the next chapter evolution in how we realize the benefits.
When you said secret sauce, it kind of made me think about privacy, not for companies and for the consumer. I know this is a sort of nebulous at this point because it's still very new, but what does privacy look like in terms of regulating AI from not only the government standpoint and the corporate standpoint?
I can jump in here. Obviously, there's been a lot of focus so far in Europe with their data protection authorities starting to work on this and asking a bunch of questions about how individual data is being used. By and large, these models are not focused on individual data. They pick them up as a side effect of pulling in information that's been public across the web for many years. But we do have to be careful about making sure that they're not inappropriately reciting back data in ways that could compromise individual user privacy. So we've talked about the notion of focus not on the inputs, but on the outputs. That the companies, both the model developers and the deployers, have a responsibility to make sure that there are filters in place so that inappropriate combinations of information, a user's name and their bank account number and their password, aren't somehow spit back out of the model. I think that's a perfectly fair request and one that we need to establish as a norm. I think there's a risk if you go too far on the input side of trying to micromanage how the models are actually being created, that you could actually reduce the amount of innovation we're seeing here. So I think that's the balance to strike.
But I think also as companies develop their own internal LLMs with their proprietary data, privacy actually in that data that is used to train that LLM is actually very important. And I think that's where, laws like GDPR and a potential federal privacy law that allows consumers some control over their data actually can help bring more trust into those LLMs and the companies that are employing them. And so, I think there's lots of pieces to it. The data is required in order for these things to be successful. You need the data. You also need to have consumers' trust in what is actually coming out of the companies. And so part of that involves this benefit of, hey, you have to trust us with your data. How can we create that trust? And privacy legislation, federal privacy legislation, where we all are, under one way of doing it, and will create much more trust in consumers and be able to actually allow this technology to move forward.
We only have a few minutes left, and I want to leave everyone with a lighter note, and just to end on a lighter note, and I'll go down, starting with you, Rahul. What is something on the horizon that you're most hopeful for when it comes to U.S. leadership in AI?
I think the impact it will have in creating new jobs and making small businesses create a level playing field for small businesses to be able to, act or behave as if they had a lot of resources.
I think we're going to see a generation of kids who never thought they could be scientists, who never had the access to resources that were necessary, have new horizons open for them. And I think we're going to achieve remarkable things. The technology industry is rightly sometimes accused of overpromising in 1 year and over-delivering in 10. And that may be the case here, that who knows whether the things we're talking about will happen by 2025, but we're really confident that they're going to happen by 2034. And that's going to change the world, we hope, in positive ways for all of us.
I guess I'm very hopeful that this technology will actually help contribute to more prosperity across all income levels by allowing people to actually have more knowledge that they didn't have access to before, and be able to have access to services that were only available to people who were very rich before. I think this will actually help people build prosperity in their lives in a way that wasn't available to them prior.
I think just like the U.S. led the world in the LLM revolution, I think that the U.S. has a tremendous opportunity to lead the world in applying these LLMs to very critical healthcare problems that the entire world faces. And I think never has there been a technological breakthrough that could have more impact on the way that we help people stay healthy and cure disease than this one. So I think it could be a tremendous impact for the world.
Thank you so much to all of you for helping us make sense of this, seeing the bright side of AI. It seems like there's a really good future ahead. So thank you so much for your time.